Episode 4, the one with Scareglow in it. So this is where we're going to start seeing some real changes from how certain things are normally portrayed in the bios or in previous shows. So the land of the dead they actually call Subternia. And Subternia is actually normally the term for the underground world in Eternia. This is, you go underground and there's these civilizations that live there. Whiplash's people live there. There's also a race of bat people. This was in the 2000X cartoon and then get added into the bios. But this is completely different. Here, Subternia is this place that you can sail through the Crystal Sea to get to, which, by the way, is very much in keeping with mythology. Very much feels like Odysseus's journey to hell and stuff like that. So you sail there and then you go in there. And so it's this dark place that is the realm of Scareglow, and he appears to be the only living thing there as far as we see. Or perhaps the Shadow Beasts are also living creatures. It doesn't seem likely. They seem some kind of spiritual creatures. Maybe they're ghosts of Shadow Beast or something. But as Roboto says, this is a new version of a Shadow Beast we've never seen before. These guys can shape change into your worst nightmare and all this stuff. So very interesting choice. They do look cool though. My only problem with the episode is that after watching it twice, I'm still unsure about what Subternia or the Land of the Dead actually is. It's referred to as hell in the same way that the next place they go to is referred to as heaven. But we don't get any indication that anyone actually goes to this Subternia place when they die, or that there are any actual spirits there. It's kind of really mysterious. It just appears to be the realm of Scareglow, and that, he's the only thing living there. Well, he's probably not living, so there's probably nothing living there, so maybe that's why it's called the Land of the Dead. I'm not sure. I'm a little fuzzy about that, but to be honest with you, it's a very small kind of gripe I have with an otherwise fantastic episode. Scareglow is awesome. I love the fact that he's the ruler of this hell-like domain, whatever that means, but regardless of if it's some kind of afterlife or just some place that he will capture you and torture you for the rest of eternity if you go into. He was so cool. I loved his character. Probably not the ghost of Skeletor, but they do sort of leave it a little bit ambiguous, a little bit mysterious when Teela asks him if he's Skeletor, because he looks like it, right? He says that he knows that name and that he's the shadow of a king who's now the king of shadows in this humble domain. So he remains as mysterious as ever, but I like that about the character. And this is our first time ever seeing him in animation. I think they did a fantastic job. And by the way, his appearance very much appears to be inspired by the comic book The Power of Fear. That was a one-shot that was created by MB Creations, and it was a Scareglow that was designed to fit in with the 2000X line, and he only appeared for that one issue, but it's kind of cool to see that, make it onto the screen. So let's talk about that scene where she defeats Scareglow. So it's a little ambiguous as to what's going on, but she's able to basically control the fears that he's creating to attack them with. And it very much appears to be magical in nature what she's doing. We have tattoos appear on her head, which I'm not entirely certain where they're coming from or what they're a reference to. They sort of remind me of the blue tattoos that 2000X Sorceress had. So it could be kind of a reference to that. It could be a hint at what she's going to look like in the future, perhaps. But for those of you who don't know anything about Teela, she is secretly the sorceress's daughter. That thing they keep trying to tell her and they keep getting interrupted is the fact that her mama is the sorceress and she is supposed to take her mama's place at some point and become sorceress of Grayskull. And I'll get into at the end with my theory about what's going to happen in part 2, about what all this may mean for Teela in the future. But let's just say it was an interesting scene. Definitely interesting. So let's talk about Orko. So there's a great scene between him and Evelyn. Actually, several great scenes between him and Evelyn. I love the interaction between those two characters. I would have never thought to put those two characters together, but it just works so well. But this is a very different Orko from Filmation, as we learn when he starts talking about what it was like in Trala and his relationship with his parents and stuff. Of course, in Filmation, in Trala, he was a great mage and he was known as Orko the Great. Here, it's the opposite. And that's okay, but it's just another reminder they're not following all the Filmation story and they're creating their own story. And I think the story that they've created here is fantastic. I really love him in this episode. I love the scene where he faces down Scareglow. I thought that was so great. And is it the death of the character? I mean, they think he's dead, right? It's the emotion it brings out in the characters that really matters. Now, as a viewer, do I have any reason to believe that character is actually dead? Not really, right? We see them fighting, right? Him and Scareglow. We see them swallowed up by singularity, right? Like they're being teleported away, and then suddenly that singularity explodes. What that means, we don't know. We do not see him die. So I don't think he's really dead, but it also opens up some interesting questions about what happened to him if he's not. So my theory is probably he's going to end up being Scareglow's prisoner and they may have to rescue him. That's my theory. Episode 5. So this is the episode that takes the most liberties with the source material, and I had a little bit of mixed feelings on this one. So we're in a place called Preternia. Now, this is a huge difference than everything that's ever been done with that term before, up till now. So Preternia is normally the name for ancient Eternia. Here it is the afterlife. It is basically the Elysian Fields from Greek mythology, or Valhalla is a place where heroes go after they die. And to make it even stranger, the 3 towers of Eternia are there. Now this was this kind of giant playset that they put out back in the day, which had the Tower of Grayskull, the Central Tower, and then a Snake Tower, Viper Tower, something like that. And it's just weird to have this in the afterlife. I mean, I can sort of justify having Grayskull in the Central Tower, but why in the world is there like a Snake Mountain Tower? Why would that be in this paradise only occupied by warriors who fought for good? It's just weird. And of course, the 3 towers were supposed to be, this thing that, the heroes in the present day would fight over. But I think it also existed back in ancient times and in the toy version of Preternia, and the ancient heroes that were going to come out in a spin-off line called The Powers of Grayskull could also fight over those 3 towers. So again, it's just a really weird use of that concept. I just didn't quite understand why they used the towers like that, why they were in the afterlife and stuff. Now, an interesting tidbit is that the Horde is mentioned in this episode, and I'm an evil Horde fan, right? So I had my ears perked up. So when Andra meets Hero, she mentions that he fought off a Horde invasion in ancient times. Now, this is a little different from Filmation. The Horde scouting and invasion of Eternia happened in fairly recent history in Filmation. However, if we go and look at 2000X, where She-Ra did not exist at all, right? That's where they had a Horde invasion in ancient times. That one was stopped by King Grayskull, and then they were sealed off in this dimension called Despondos. But that's where they're getting that from, that the Horde existed in ancient times. So I don't know if that's a confirmation that She-Ra just doesn't exist in this version of the mythos, like what happened in 2000X. But I don't see any evidence that She-Ra exists. She's certainly not been mentioned. No one's talked about Etheria, nothing like that. So That's my assumption at this point. The scenes between Adam and Tila were so good. I mean, there's a lot of chemistry between those two, and I just love it. There's a really great little tidbit that Adam chose to be his lesser self. Now, that's very interesting, though, in relationship to those other characters. So, the champions that were shown in this episode in the toy line and the classics were called the He-Men. And I'm glad they changed that name. I like the term champions a lot better. Hopefully, that will be kept going forward. But the idea behind the champions was to kind of put together a bunch of characters that were kind of He-Man related and make them into characters who would guard the power sword throughout the ages until it got to the chosen one, until it got to Adam. Now, the interesting thing is, other than King Grayskull, I don't recall any of the He-Men actually using the power sword. So the indication that they have a larger form that we're seeing, right? They have a powerful form similar to He-Man that we're looking at, indicates they had a weaker form similar to Adam, which is different. And why that's different is that would mean that the power of Grayskull is not locked to Adam. It's not a one-time thing, and it's not locked to his biology. It's not locked to him being some descendant of Grayskull, which is what's happened in some previous canons for the franchise. And we can actually see that he's not a descendant of Grayskull in this version because Grayskull has been race swapped as a black man. So obviously, Adam does not look biracial. So, it frees up the fact that other people can call down the power and you don't have to have, some kind of special family history. And I like that, and it also comes into play at the end. The way they dealt with the champions was a bit odd. So they didn't really flesh them out or really tell us who most of them were. It was just there to, I guess, show that there had been other people who championed Grayskull or fought for good before Adam. And I don't know, it was kind of interesting. So if you do want to know who they are, so King Grayskull was introduced in the 2000 X line. In that story and the bios, Castle Grayskull was his castle, and he is the origin of the power of Grayskull. When you're Adam's calling down that power, he's talking about King Grayskull's power. Hero was meant to be the lead in the Powers of Grayskull line that was going to be set in ancient Preternia, and he was the greatest magician in the universe, and in this cartoon he's been reimagined as the son, probably, I assume, adoptive son of King Grayskull. That little bit actually came from the comic book that they put out a couple weeks ago that's a prequel to the animated series. So the champion you see very briefly, who has brown hair and a black armor, that's Wundar, and Wundar was a repaint of He-Man that had brown hair that was given away as a giveaway somewhere. A lot of fans thought it was from Wonder Bread, and so that's why he was called Wundar. And then there's the lady who looks like the sorceress, who speaks in a language that neither Adam nor Tila can understand. And I had to look at the captions, but her name is Kuduk. And most likely that's a reference to Kuduk Ungol, who was the previous sorceress in the Filmation cartoon. Now, it couldn't be that character because she spoke in a language that Eternians could understand. So perhaps it's another character who just shares that name. It's not uncommon to take the names of ancient heroes or pass on names in families. For instance, the current sorceress is named Tila Na. Her daughter is named Tila. So, and then there's a scene where they're all just standing around talking. I think there's a campfire or something. There's some extras in there that I think they just made up to show that there are some extra people in this version of Heaven that maybe we just don't know from the toy line. I thought Roboto's death was done well. Now, Roboto is kind of hard to kill. I sort of suspect Duncan may have a backup file for his memory somewhere, but regardless, it's really about the emotional power of the scene and its effect on the characters. But I'm a comic fan, so I'm a little cynical about like, are they really dead? So you gotta excuse me. One thing that did connect with me a little less was the kind of subplot where like, oh, does Adam want to stay in heaven or not? I understand why the other champions want to stay in heaven, right? Because everybody they know is dead, right? So there's no connection between them and the modern world. Adam just died. He left behind his family. He left behind the girl he's got a crush on. He left behind everything he knows. So I really didn't, I wasn't like, gosh, Adam's going to have to give up so much. And maybe it was just like, I mean, that's not really my idea of heaven. Like, I don't think I would enjoy chasing a saber-toothed tiger around the forest. I don't think I would choose that over living. You know what I'm saying? I certainly wouldn't choose it over Tila. You know what I'm saying? But they did do a good job of establishing that he can't come back after this. And that's one of the problems you have when you kill a character off and you bring them back, like, oh, well, you can just keep doing that over and over again. They did a really good job of establishing, like, if he comes back and he dies, that's it. And oh my God, that ending. I mean, part of me really loves it, and then part of me is like, really? So, I mean, I thought, what they did in episode 1 was so powerful, and just brought out so many interesting things out of these characters. Here, it just feels like it's done, to shock people, and it's not quite as powerful. I know that there's no way Adam's going to die, because he can't die this time, right? So I know he's just wounded and that he will recover. But it is very well done, and as I said in my non-spoiler review, it is definitely some nightmare fuel. That is one of the most intense things I've ever seen, just Skeletor right up in your face as he's stabbing you through the gut. Wow. And then there's Skelegod, and that's the form that Skeletor takes once he calls down the power. And you remember when I said that there's a reason He-Man keeps this secret? This is it. Skeletor, in that final scene before they died, found out that He-Man called down the power of Grayskull, and he knew exactly how he called it down. He heard the magic words. He knew exactly what to do when he grabbed that power sword. This is why He-Man keeps it a secret. Now, is that because anyone can become He-Man? I think so. I think anyone can call down that power. So that's going to open up some very interesting possibilities for next season. So let's speculate about part 2. So the most obvious thing that could happen would be Skeletor takes Grayskull and conquers Eternia, and that the heroes have to go underground or become a rebellion against him. I think that's certainly possible. There is also a possibility maybe he loses the power. The thing is, I'm not sure how that happens, because the only time that I recall He-Man losing the power, right, is when he called it back himself. When he said, let the power return. Now, my memory's probably not that great. There's maybe some other circumstances, but it's pretty hard to get the power of Grayskull out of somebody, is my recollection. But also keep track of who's in the room, too, though, because Evelyn's there, right? Kevin Smith said we'd learn a lot more about Evelyn in part 2, so I got a feeling she has a major part. And so my suspicion, and this is, again, pure speculation, but I think she's going to pull an Infinity Gauntlet on Skeletor. I think at some point he's going to relinquish the power, she's going to get a hold of the sword, and she'll take it. That's just pure speculation, but I'd love to see it. As far as Adam goes, I mean, like I said, obviously he can't die, but he is wounded. So there's several possibilities there. Obviously the magic is returned to Eternia. Maybe they could find a healer, or a certain amount of time will pass and we'll let him heal so he can be a part of whatever comes next. Or maybe he will be in like a coma, or he'll be recovering while the others are doing stuff. if he is an active member, it could be just as Prince Adam, or they may come up with some ways that he could have powers that don't require the power sword. Uh, in the bios, and this is kind of taking inspiration from various things from throughout the franchise, there is an electronic power sword that imitates what the power sword can do. This was inspired by 2000X. And then taken from the very earliest mini comics, there's a harness that can create a force field, and this was used by He-Man in the very earliest mini comics, and that's what gave him his power. I think there'll still be a good emphasis on Teela, because the dangling plot line is that she has not been told who her mama is. And I think that's going to be a major thing in part 2. I suspect that we're not going to see her immediately become the sorceress. She's not going to put on her mama's clothing and go off and lock herself in Grayskull. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to be even an option. So I suspect she'll probably develop some powers. The thing about Teela that makes her unique, and this is a theory, but this has kind of been hinted at in various places. The Sorceress of Grayskull is not a hereditary position, at least according to Filmation. Teela Na did not know the previous sorceress in any way. She was just a normal person who walked in, had no magical experience, and Grayskull gave her the power to be the sorceress. So my thing is, why would Teela have to be the sorceress just because her mama is? And I think the reason for that is because I don't think the sorceress was ever supposed to have a child. I think it's supposed to be, similar to being a nun. She's supposed to be celibate, and she's supposed to be totally devoted to Grayskull. I think when a sorceress has a child, they pass on to powers to that child that, humans aren't meant to have, but can be pretty handy. And so I think those powers are probably going to show up in part 2. And Marlena joked that Teela looked like a warrior goddess, which is, of course, a reference to her description of her toy in the action figure line. But it could also be foreshadowing. So she could become, this warrior goddess. She could have magic and the ability to, whoop people's ass with weapons. This would be very similar to, say, the role of the goddess in the early mini comics. And in fact, she may end up with something similar to the snake armor worn by the goddess, or since she already has tattoos that appeared that are the same color as what the 2000X sorceress had, maybe she'll end up in something that looks like that. I don't know, but I'm definitely intrigued. I think that this is a creative team that could handle that transition from Teela as just a warrior to Teela as a warrior goddess and or sorceress and or goddess, whatever her fate is. I feel like she's in pretty good hands. And so for part 2, I would probably predict that Roboto and Orko are going to come back. I would also predict Mossman is going to come back, because what did we establish in the final episode of part 1? That anyone can just walk through that door and come back to life. So why wouldn't he, right? I wouldn't surprise me if all the champions didn't do that. I mean, they might die in some final battle, and have their, eternal rest or whatever. But it wouldn't surprise me if it didn't end with all of them walking out and joining some kind of huge final battle with all the characters in it or something like that. Kevin Smith did say that it was going to have a happy ending at the very end, and that, he was going to put everything back into place. It was just going to be, a lot of struggle and a lot of torment getting there, right? And so my theory for the very ending, right, is that if you look at the bios, the final fate of He-Man and Teela marry. Adam succeeds his father, he becomes King He-Man, and they have a son. And the reason I think this is going to finally happen, this is finally going to make it into animation, this is from a TV series that was proposed but never happened, is that when we see him In the comic book that it ties into this, is published by Dark Horse, is on the shelves right now. There's a scene where he's able to interact with people from the ancient past. And King Grayskull had a son who died named Dare. And he tells King Grayskull he'll make sure that name lives on. The son of He-Man in both the bios and the show that never got made was Dare. So I think that's where we're going. I think we're going to end with an epilogue with King He-Man, his son, Queen Tila. Awesome stuff. I am looking forward to that. Whatever they decide to do, I'm sure I'll love it, but I think that would be amazing if that is really, really where they're going to go. So anyway, that is it. That is all the thoughts I have right now on Masters of the Universe Revelation. I thought the first 5 parts were really great, and so looking forward to the rest of that. Oh my gosh, this is, in my opinion, one of the best things that's ever been done with this franchise, and I just want to thank everybody involved who made this happen, because this has been a fan's dream come true. Like and subscribe for more videos, and until next time, good journey.